Friends laughed at his singing at our party. What he did next destroyed everything. Hello, Reddit. My name is Caroline, and I'm a 28-year-old baker. I got married 6 days ago, and there's already a huge problem with my marriage. I'm here because I need some desperately urgent advice. Something had happened during our wedding party, and ever since, Andrew has not stepped his foot in our new home. In fact, we were supposed to be going for our honeymoon trip today, but I haven't even heard anything from him. It's actually my fault, and I should have stopped everything from becoming that worst, and I really shouldn't have done what I did from the beginning, and now it is seriously ruining everything. I cannot afford to lose Andrew, guys. We're barely 1 week into our marriage, and after 4 years of dating, I cannot lose everything. My husband had decided to sing at our wedding, and I hadn't wanted to object. His voice had always been terrible, but it was his day as well as ours. I had done my best trying to get him a voice trainer discreetly, but he had refused any sort of help with his voice, so I had resigned in my attempt to get him to sing better. Well, our wedding day came, and after the exchange of vows, he had taken up the stage and he started singing. A different song than the one he rehearsed initially. I was cringing silently on my seat, but I was smiling outwardly, trying not to make it look bad. But my friends, they didn't hide their horror at his voice. They laughed out loud and one even snorted. It was horrible watching them do that, but my husband saw what my friends were doing and he had become so angry, and what he did next ruined everything. I mean literally everything. He exposed me. Everything I thought he didn't know, he actually knew. And he made sure that everyone else knew that too. While dating Andrew, I had done something totally unforgivable, but I thought my secret was safe. I didn't know that Andrew had found out before the wedding and he just wanted to taunt me with it. Apparently, the singing had been one of the ways he wanted to get his revenge. Andrew found out about my lover, and he exposed me at our wedding. Don't judge me yet. There's a whole lot more to the story than I have said. Ethan had been my first boyfriend even before I was out of high school, and I believe I loved him very much back then and would do anything for him, including absconding from home with him to the city. I knew nothing or no one and had no money, all because my parents didn't approve of him. Ethan had been what no parents would want for their daughters at all. I mean, if it had been the old age, the mothers would lock their girls inside, while the fathers would hold a shotgun to his throat and threaten him to stay away from their daughters, and it was no different from my religious parents and siblings who wanted me to have nothing to do with him, but I was too in love with him to care what they said. He had been 20 while I was 17, and crazily in love with him and willing to do everything for him, including absconding. He had tattoos, piercings in very dangerous places, and he cut his hair crazy and also wore clothes that were quite distasteful. But I didn't mind any of that. I loved him, and that was all that mattered to me at that point. Ethan had been the one I had my first everything sexual with, and many more after that. He was a musician, or so he'd say, and he was always walking around with one guitar and his record that he managed to get some money, through my help, meaning I stole from my parents to help him get it, to do, hoping some big producer would make sense of his music and help him. Ethan managed to convince me he would do well in his musical career, so when my parents had threatened to take me far away and I told Ethan about it, he had brought the idea of running away, and I had accepted without much convincing. We lived with one of his unruly friends, who was worse than him, for some months after absconding until the friend had gotten uncomfortable harboring us in his space. Apparently, it wasn't easy having to provide shelter and also feed us. He introduced Ethan to dealing with drugs, but I had been so scared about it, so Ethan had refused and just started doing some part-time jobs, which I have no idea what exactly he was doing. Whenever I asked, he usually was evasive about it and just ended up not giving a reasonable answer to it. Eventually, Ethan was able to save enough money to get us a shabby room so we could stay alone. But Ethan started some suspicious moves and was being shady about it even more than before. After a year of living together, Ethan had suggested I start working since I was legally an adult, and we needed to make more money, and I had agreed. He had told me he had a friend who could get me a job, and shockingly, the job had been a waitress at a clubhouse. At first, I thought it was just about serving people drinks and all, but it had been more than that. My uniform had been very short and see-through, and then the men just liked to grab and touch me anyhow. I complained to Ethan about it, but he had convinced me to endure just until he got enough money to get us off the streets, so I continued to work there for about another year, until I had become pregnant at age 19 with Ethan's baby. When I told him about the baby, he had been angry and had demanded I get rid of the baby, and I agreed with him. But then, when we visited the clinic, we couldn't even afford the fee for the abortion, so we went back home and decided that we had 9 whole months to decide what to do with the child. I got lots of morning sickness and was always sick even through the day, especially for the first 3 months, so I had to quit my job at the club and focus on raising the baby. I was only 6 months pregnant when Ethan was arrested along with 3 others for human trafficking. I had no one to turn to, so I had gathered the little money he usually gave me to keep for him, and I had gone back to my parents. After a lot of pleading and seeing my condition, they had accepted me back under the condition that I signed a written contract that I was never to see Ethan again, even if he got out of prison. I had agreed, of course, because I had no choice, and I realized just how much better it was not having to live on the street or hustle. Sadly, my baby died when I gave birth, but I felt relieved instead of sad. I had literally been given a clean slate to start with, and a baby was definitely a whole lot of baggage. And I had found out before I left where I stayed with Ethan that I had apparently been promised to a buyer, but the buyer wanted no baby business. So that was why selling me was delayed, and the client refused to pay unless I was delivered to them as planned. So I basically had a narrow escape. My parents decided to send me to a local college very close to home so they could monitor me. They didn't believe fully that I was reformed and didn't want the life I had before. So I had gone to college, and because I wanted no one to know about my dirty past, I never mentioned anything about Ethan to anybody, including the friends I made. Before I met Andrew at all, I had also dated a guy named Wilson. Wilson really liked me, but the only problem we usually had was that he thought I was really secretive and hiding things from him. And then again, I never allowed him to touch me, so he assumed I was a virgin, and I let him assume that. We dated for 1.5 years before Wilson finally got tired of being celibate in the relationship and had ended things with me. In a way, I just wanted to protect myself from someone who would turn out like Ethan again, and I just couldn't bring myself to sleep with him because he reminded me, with his tiny arm tattoo, about Ethan. I didn't mind when he ended things because I was feeling too pressured by him, so I was relieved when he ended things with me. It would have hurt his pride if I had ended things with him, so I let him think he was the one who initiated the whole breakup. I decided not to date anyone anymore until I graduated, and I did stick to that. I had a lot of guys who had asked me out, but I refused all of them, because somehow, even if I was interested from the beginning and then one thing about them reminded me about Ethan, I broke off all connections. I finished college and earned the name Nun because of how strict I was with my relationships and how much I hated premarital sex. Although they had no idea what my past was like, they basically assumed I was a virgin and was planning to stay that way until marriage. After college, I decided to learn a skill, and I had fallen in love with baking. So I had my parents pay for baking classes for me, and within 1 year of professional training, I was very good. My parents had paid for a shop for me in another town, especially because I had insisted I wanted to start afresh in a new environment, and I had started baking and selling cakes, cupcakes, and even bread. Within 1 year, I was quite popular and very well known for my delicious cakes. And that was how I met Andrew. Andrew had come to my bakery to pick up bread, and I assumed he was someone else. Usually, a particular company would make a pre-order every day for my special bread for their boss, and one of the workers would come to pick it up. Mostly, it was the personal assistant, and we were well bonded and all. But sometimes, if he was too busy working, he'd send someone else to pick it up, but he would put a call across to him first. So, when I had seen Andrew that day, I had assumed he came to pick the bread up on behalf of the personal assistant of their boss, who had surprisingly not given me a call that day to tell me another person was coming. He had been surprised but didn't say anything and had collected the bread and paid for it. He continued showing up like that for 2 weeks, and we would make conversations and laugh when the other said something funny. In fact, we became so close, we were teasing each other, and I began to look forward to seeing him every day. It had been the day he had not been around to come around, and the personal assistant had shown up to pick the bread, that I found out exactly who Andrew was. I had asked the personal assistant why their worker wasn't there to pick it as usual, and he had looked confused and had told me that the last 2 weeks, his boss had been the one coming around to pick his bread himself. Shocked was an understatement, and I felt somehow lied to because he hadn't told me the truth about himself. But Andrew had been a real sweetheart because he had apologized for a whole week, sending me flowers every morning and a box of chocolate to which an "I'm sorry" note was usually attached. I forgave him, and he eventually asked me out on a date. I had fun on our first date, and then another, until he eventually asked me to be his girlfriend, which I had agreed to quickly. Andrew was the direct opposite of Ethan, and I saw nothing to compare them with because of how amazing Andrew had turned out to be. Even my parents and siblings loved him very much and encouraged our relationship on the first meeting, so that was how I started dating Andrew. But the problem is, I never told Andrew about Ethan or anything about my past. Andrew believed me to be an angel, and I wanted to remain that way in his eyes. I didn't want him to find out about my dirty past, so whenever I told childhood stories or anything, I avoided those 3 years of my life that I wasted with Ethan. I also did not allow Andrew to have sex with me. He believed, as the others did, that I was a virgin and wanted to remain that way until marriage, and I never tried to correct that because it would lead to a series of questions I didn't want to answer, and eventually, my secret would be out in the open, and Andrew would hate me and never want to be with me again. I only ever mentioned Ethan once, and it had been a slip of the tongue, which I regretted instantly, as Andrew had asked questions about him. But I had told him he was my ex-boyfriend and we didn't work out, and then I purposely changed the subject of conversation. Andrew, however, wasn't as secretive as I was. He told me every little detail about his life, and even about his past girlfriend, who had almost ruined his life. She had apparently aborted 2 babies, and he was dying of guilt, not knowing that the babies weren't even his in the first place, but for her lover. He ended things with her after finding out that she had just lied to him just because she wanted him to suffer for arguing with her, but he never trusted any lady again after that until me. Andrew respected my decision not to have sex before marriage, and also because he didn't want a repetition of what happened with his ex, so he refrained from sexual activities with me. Sure, we kissed, and I knew he was highly attracted to me because when we kissed or cuddled, I usually felt his erection. So I knew he only just simply respected my decision to wait until marriage before having sex. On our 3rd-year anniversary of being together as a couple, Andrew had suggested we go on a short trip out of town, and I had agreed excitedly. I hadn't even bothered to ask where we were going. I was only happy we got to travel, which we didn't do often because of how demanding Andrew's work could be. I simply packed my bags for the 3-day trip and hopped into the car we were taking because Andrew had decided to drive. I enjoyed the drive until the roads started to look familiar. Our trip had apparently been planned to the particular town where I had lived with Ethan years back. I was so scared, but I couldn't even show it because, for all Andrew knew, I had never been to that town before. We drove to a hotel, which I used to know because it was right beside the club I used to work at, and I had always admired it and promised myself that I would be rich one day and visit the hotel. Well, that day had been the day, the only thing. I wasn't even in the least excited about it. It had only been the first day that I had allowed Andrew to drag me around the town to show me some memorable places, which I already knew. In fact, I could walk that whole town with my eyes closed, but Andrew obviously didn't know that. My worst nightmare had come to pass when one of the girls I used to work with at the club had seen me and recognized me, and she had even walked up to me and said hello. I pretended not to know her, and she apologized and left. I quickly lied that I was having a headache, and Andrew had allowed us to return early to our hotel room. The next day, I pretended not to be better, and I had even pretended I picked a bug when I started throwing up whatever I ate. I actually had been forcing myself to vomit so that Andrew could let us go back home, and it had worked as we left the place a day earlier than intended. Well, my happiness of having escaped having any contact with Ethan was short-lived, especially because I had gotten a strange call a week after the trip, and it had been from Ethan, who had demanded that we meet. I was scared of him finding out I hadn't told Andrew about him, so I had arranged a meeting with him at my bakery. I closed the bakery for that day, and I had paid his transport fee so he could come down to my side of the city. Ethan had arrived and had angrily demanded why I decided to run away from him with our baby, and he had also concluded that it was because I thought he would never make it out of prison. I told him the truth about the baby and about what I found out about his true intentions, and Ethan had just shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. He had made excuses that he was just young and stupid and just wanted to make money at all costs back then. I asked him why he wanted to see me exactly because we had no business again together. The baby that would have joined us was dead, and there was nothing linking us. But Ethan had made confessions of missing me and never having seen another person like me, and that he wanted me back. When I told him I was already with someone else, he had gotten really angry and had accused me again, saying that I was already enjoying a good life, and that was why I lied about knowing the girl the other day I had gone on the trip. Ethan had eventually left, but not without promising to come back again, and that scared me a lot. The crazy thing was, it also excited me. Ethan brought lots of danger and risks to my life, and strangely, that seemed to turn me on like nothing else did. Not even Andrew was able to turn me on that much. I know how crazy that probably sounds, but at that moment it was true. Seeing Ethan again brought back memories of how great sex between us had been. It wasn't sex between us that lacked. We had that in abundance. It was everything else that was lacking: trust, love, and even devotion. He stayed true to his words and started coming around the bakery after also pleading that he had changed after getting out of prison. He even made extra effort to show that he had. He showed up with flowers even on some days, and he helped me out at the bakery. He even offered emotional support whenever I was down, things he never did before. It made me believe stupidly that he had changed, so I let him in. I told him everything, including how I discovered he wanted to sell me off for money and how I met Andrew. He apologized profusely and swore to me that he regretted everything, especially losing me. I forgave him, and we became really close. However, I did not tell Andrew anything about Ethan. It would mean I had to tell him about my past, that I didn't want him ever finding out about, so I kept Ethan's return a secret from Andrew. I believed I could handle everything together and that I would be able to get the closure I needed from Ethan too. So it was a win-win situation for me. Or so I thought. Ethan was very good at seduction, which was why he was able to seduce me at a younger age, and as an adult, he was a game master and he knew exactly what he was doing to me. The first time I had sex with Ethan was at the bakery. It was one particular day that I had been stuck at the bakery up until midnight. I was working on a last-minute order of a wedding cake, and Ethan had stayed to help me with it. Wrong choice. I know that now. I refused his help initially, but he had insisted on staying back, so I agreed. Andrew had called earlier that evening and asked if he should come pick me up, and I had told him I'd be fine and had brought my car with me, which of course had been a lie. But I didn't want Andrew seeing Ethan because I did not know the sort of explanation I'd have to do. Explaining why my ex, who almost sold me off, was with me alone at that hour working on a cake, or rather seducing me while working on a cake. I literally did all the work. He just stood behind me, breathing down my neck and placing feather kisses on my shoulder blade. When I finally finished the cake and was ready to go home, I was so exhausted and turned on. But I didn't say or do anything about it. But Ethan knew. He knew what it was exactly that made me tick, and he knew how I looked when turned on. He must have noticed it and taken it to his advantage. He offered to help me massage my shoulder, and I stupidly agreed. I thought it was a win for me because I could go to Andrew's place because of how late it was, so it was better getting an unpaid help with my hurting shoulders. Ethan managed to turn a shoulder massage into a seduction game, and by the time he was done, I was so turned on. Ethan knew that, and so when he turned me in my seat and kissed me, I hadn't even hesitated before wrapping my arms around his neck and giving him full permission. We had sex right there on my still-stained kitchen aisle with flour, which I had planned to take care of the next day. I let him remove my apron and then my dress, and I let him go down on me while I clutched the hand of the chair I was sitting on in my sexual glaze. I let him remove the rest of my clothes and watched him remove his, and I let him turn me over, and I didn't object when he rammed into me. It all felt right at that moment. I didn't even last long before having an orgasm. That was how turned on I was. But when we finished having sex, I realized what I had done stupidly, and I stumbled on my words while wearing back my clothes that were now stained with flour after our sexual expenditure. It's not you. It's me. I cannot do this again, and I don't think you should come back here anymore. I love Andrew, and I'm going to marry him, and there's no hope of you and I ever being together again. I told him, and I even transferred some money to his account so he could just maybe use it as payment for the sex. I know how horrible that sounds now, but at that moment that was all I could think to do. I didn't want Andrew finding out about my sin. But the next day, when I had arrived at work, Ethan had been standing there waiting for me, and he promised me he just wanted to be with me, and promised not to interfere in my relationship with Andrew. I had not agreed at first, but then I eventually gave in because Ethan could be persuasive when he wanted to be. And so that had been the beginning of our full-blown affair. I would sometimes close up early, even though I had orders, just so we could do the dirty deeds. My guilty conscience comes into play, especially when Andrew tries to ask about my day or tries to come over to the bakery, and I had to make up a lie so he wouldn't see Ethan at all. Soon Ethan started to get bolder with our affair, and had almost caused me trouble with my parents and Andrew. My mom had surprised me by dropping by the bakery unannounced. I had been in the kitchen making some cupcakes with Ethan. Well, we were supposedly making the cupcakes because we were literally just using the ingredients and turning them into sex toys to turn each other on. My mom had dropped by, and I had quickly gone to meet her in my messy clothes and lied that I tripped and poured some ingredients on myself. But Ethan had stepped out after me and confidently said a hello to my mom, who had been so shocked, and she had dragged me outside and asked me what Ethan was doing at my bakery of all places in the world to be in. I made excuses that we were only friends now, and he had only dropped by and saw I was busy and asked to help me. And while trying to save me from tripping with all the ingredients in my hand, he had gotten some on him too. My mom didn't believe me, and she had just left without saying another word to me. I had gotten angry with Ethan for trying to mess up my relationship with my mother for the second time. He apologized and promised not to do it again, but then he had done something again, only this time it had been when I was with Andrew. I closed up the shop for 2 days because Andrew had been sick, and I wanted to stay to take care of him, but that had left Ethan impatient and agitated. So he kept calling, and when I wasn't picking up his calls, he had eventually sent me a sexual innuendo text. And unfortunately, my phone had been with Andrew as I had gone to get him more soup. Luckily, he didn't know my password, but he had just seen the message pop up and had asked me who the person texting me nonstop was. I quickly lied that it was a client who wanted a cake and didn't want no for an answer. I got really angry with Ethan and did not speak to him for some days before eventually forgiving him after he apologized severally, and we continued like we didn't ever stop before. About a month after that, Andrew had proposed to me on my birthday right at the bakery with Ethan just in sight, watching everything from the kitchen where he hid. My birthday had come, and Andrew had not even wished me or bothered with gifts, and I had been very upset, and I just went to the bakery and baked too many cookies. When Ethan finally showed up in the afternoon and wished me a happy birthday, I had told him about Andrew not wishing me and how upset I was about it. He had just cuddled me and eventually tempted me to have sex on that spot. Just a few seconds after Ethan had gone to remove the already burning cookies from the oven in the kitchen, Andrew had stepped in with some roses and a ring in his hand. I panicked and quickly shouted his name so that Ethan would know not to step out, and he hadn't, thankfully. At least not what he did with my mom the other time. Andrew had proposed to me, and I had said yes immediately, and when he had suggested I close up the shop so we could go celebrate someplace special, I had made some excuses and managed to get him to leave with promises to meet him at home in an hour's time. When Ethan had stepped out, he had been angry and hadn't even waited to help me clean up and just left after making a sarcastic comment about my beautiful diamond ring. I didn't mind. I was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. Andrew and I made plans to get married within 3 weeks, and I had been so happy. Andrew wanted to rush our wedding for some reason best known to him, but I didn't mind it. All I wanted was just to be married to him. But then there was Ethan. I had to get rid of him, permanently. When I told Ethan that we could no longer be together as sexual partners after another bout of sexual activities in my bakery, he had been upset and refused, but this time I had been firm about it, and he had left eventually and didn't show up again until the night before my wedding at my apartment. He had told me he just wanted goodbye sex before I was officially snatched, and I agreed happily thinking it was all over and that I could really eat my cake and still have it. But boy, was I wrong. My wedding day had been perfect until it was not. We got married in my parents' garden and then followed by the reception. Andrew and I had our first married couples dance, and it was then I noticed that something was wrong. Andrew was quite stiff, and he didn't smile or even behave like the same person who had called me the morning before our wedding day and had professed his love for me all over again, reassuring and promising me a life filled with love for forever. He hardly even looked at me throughout the dance, and I had planned to ask him what was wrong when the whole ceremony was over. After our first dance together, I danced with my dad and a few other people, and then it was finally time for Andrew's song. He went on stage and started to sing. It wasn't the song he had intended on singing before. To be honest, I had paid the DJ to turn off his mic and just play the song so it would look like he was lip-syncing the song. But Andrew had decided to sing a different song. A song about betrayal, and I was confused and also cringing at the sound of his voice. And then my friends kept laughing. They were laughing so hard, and they barely hit it. Andrew, noticing my friends, had stopped midway through the song and he had beckoned on someone. The person had a flash drive with him, and Andrew collected it and inserted it into the big screen that was placed at the stage, which I hadn't noticed before. And then before playing the video, he turned and looked at me. "Congratulations, my beautiful bride." I smiled, but the smile immediately froze when I saw exactly what it was. Andrew was playing. It was Ethan and I. In my apartment the previous night, when he had shoved me against the wall and raised my legs up and was digging into me, like his life depended on it. The sounds of my moaning filled the entire place. There was no denying what was going on. The video was as clear as daylight. Everyone gasped and looked at me in disgust. But I was more concerned about the way Andrew looked at me. He was different. He wasn't the man that professed his love for me anymore. He wasn't the same man I've known and loved for 4 years. He was different, cold, detached, and angry. And he looked at me like a tramp. I tried pleading, but no words came out. I don't even know how he found out, but all I know is that I am doomed. Until now, I haven't heard anything from him despite the numerous texts and calls. I even sent him emails, but he still wouldn't respond to any one of them. I really cannot lose Andrew, and I know I messed up and I'm at fault. I regret everything. But please, guys, please. I love Andrew so much. The thought of losing him feels like a dagger to the heart. Please help me. What do I do? How can I get Andrew to forgive me? Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been 3 months. 3 most horrible months for me. My husband has chosen to steer clear of me as everybody else has. I've been called names and tagged everywhere I step my feet as the bride who destroyed her own marriage before it even began at all. Even here on this app, the comments and the hate. I don't even need an interpreter to tell me everyone hates me. But it doesn't even matter as much to me because all that is important to me is how Andrew feels. And I know he hates me too. Probably more than the rest of the world. I deceived him, lied, manipulated him, and to top it all, I had still cheated on him. Realizing the extent of my sins is so heart-wrenching because then I realized just how much horror I brought into his life. I feel so ashamed of myself for everything I did to hurt Andrew. I regret everything so much. I allowed my stupidity to rule over me one more time, and now I've lost any chances to make anything right. I mean, I got it. I got a chance to redo life and love and family, and yet I had carelessly tossed out everything I had away because of my selfishness. Funny how I don't even have a valid reason to have cheated. It hadn't even been because of money, so I would have said maybe it was because of the money I was getting from him. It hadn't even been about emotions because I was far from being in love with him. I just managed to ruin my entire life over something as fleeting as sex. The horror I'm feeling at this moment is just too painful. My emotions are all over the place, and most of them are dark, empty, and really painful. Have you ever felt so empty, and yet that emptiness hurts so much and feels like a very heavy weight on you? Well, that will describe how I feel at this moment. Andrew wants nothing to do with me, and he made it as clear as day the day he walked out on our marriage. I had the chance. I really had the chance to just do away with everything Ethan, but I had chosen to continue on that path of lies until now that I'm well and fully destroyed. It hurts so much knowing I had everything I could have ever wanted, and yet I lost it because of my own selfish and lying self. Could I ever stop feeling like this? I know the answer to that question is no, because I'll probably be stuck with the weight of my guilt and shame throughout my life. Update. Hello, Reddits. It's me again. It's been another 2 months, making a total of 5 months since I've seen Andrew after the day of the wedding. Guess what had arrived yesterday? Annulment papers. Yes, Andrew has finally decided what to do with a cheat like me. I deserve it. I know I do. But part of me had somehow held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, he would forgive me. And even though I know that I don't deserve the forgiveness, but maybe, just maybe. But that hope has been squashed completely and finally. Andrew wants to do away with me. He hates me completely and cannot even stand me. I cannot blame him now, can I? I brought everything upon myself by rewarding all his love and affection with hurt and cheating. I wish so desperately that I had another chance to do the right thing, that I hadn't thought of cheating and I had been honest right from the beginning about my past. And when Ethan had come into the picture again, I had not tried to handle things on my own. Maybe if I had done all of those things, maybe Andrew would never be considering an annulment in just 5 months of marriage. Maybe we would be happy together now and not where we are now. and everything had been my fault. My parents wouldn't even see me. Even my siblings want nothing to do with me because of the level of disgrace I had brought on them. I cannot even blame them. They did give me a chance to right my wrongs, and I still had chosen to ruin things by going back again with the same person. If I were them, I wouldn't forgive me either. In fact, I cannot even forgive myself right now for causing this much damage. I'm so alone in this world right now. I regret so much ever allowing Ethan to ruin me the second time. I should have just learned a lesson from the first time and stuck with it. But I just had to do this. And now I'm left alone bearing the consequences of my grave sin against Andrew. I think I'll forever be stuck. No, I know I'll forever pay the price. I will forever be stuck with feeling unhappy and feeling this much guilt. I will forever be trapped in this abyss I've seemed so intent on setting for myself and have eventually fallen into. And now I'm so miserable that I'm sure that if there was another dictionary created and a word better used to describe bigger misery, it would be my name. I honestly wish I had done things better so I wouldn't have ended like I have right now. And I sure hope that regardless of how much hate you feel towards me, you'd have enough sense not to fall into the same hell I am in. Believe me, I'd rather be on the other side and reading this as someone else's life story, not mine, and learning from it. Goodbye and thanks.